A few moments ago, a couple of you have commented to me, it seems like we've been here before. These are, my first deep involvement was as administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development in the 1980s, 84, 85, where the U.S. government had a huge, a couple million tons of food to Africa over about a 12-month period in that very deep and tragic famine. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the only famine. And almost always these famines have been in part climate, but they've been many other things too. So while I can, as I look back over that almost 20 years now, it seems to me many good things have happened in Africa. But it's also true that there are these problems that have not been resolved. And it's certainly appropriate that you're gathering here today with, I know, a very distinguished panel of discussants to talk about them and review them. Let me introduce now Michelle McNabb, who is the president of the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. Michelle.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming so early on a Wednesday morning. I think that we have a webinar working as well. Yeah, good. So welcome to everyone who may be listening. This event follows an event that we had in January 25th, I think it was, at the Wilson Center, Ronald Reagan Building, that we called, "Is there a food crisis brewing in the Sahel?" At that point in January, questions were definitely being raised about the nature of the current food situation. And so we brought together a panel at that time from the region and from Washington to discuss what we know about the situation, what we know about what's going on the ground right now, and what might we need to be watching in the coming months. Now, it's been, I guess, about 8 or 10 weeks later, and I think the situation has only grown more complex in the last 10 weeks. We know, of course, about the situation in Mali and how that political crisis might be affecting, interacting with the humanitarian crisis. In the session in January, I think we tried to present some of the complexities of what's going on the ground. Knowing now, as Peter said, crisis is something, food crisis is something that the Sahel struggled with for a very, very long time. And the answers to understanding the situation are not simple. We know we don't need a Band-Aid approach to the current situation. We know we don't need to just declare famine and dump massive quantities of food aid on people. We have, I think, learned a lot of lessons. I think we have a lot more understanding of how complex the interactions are. So I've been working on these issues, on early warning and food security issues now for 20 years. And I think maybe 20 years ago when I started, and along with one of our panelists who started around the same time as I did, I think our understanding then was a little bit more simplistic about how these problems evolve and how we should respond to them. We have the great fortune now of a better understanding of how households live, how they interact, how they seek their income, how they cope with disasters. And so I'm glad that we can have people here today to talk about some of those issues. From the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa's perspective, what we like to do is try to shed light on complex issues, not try to simplify them, not try to say there's one answer, but to try to say that based on the understanding from people looking at it from different sides, hopefully we can all enhance our understanding and help figure out from our own worlds what needs to happen. Again, from the Partnership's perspective, one of the keys to us is to listen to African voices. We're very pleased to have 2 panelists today from the region, and we want to listen very closely to what they say about the situation, what their understanding is, what light they can shed on the appropriate responses, on the details of the situation, and how we need to track it, what we can do to support the real processes that are going on in the region. So I encourage everyone to listen closely to what our panelists have to say, and we hope to have time for questions and answers at the end. Again, there is no simple answer to this question. There are no simple solutions, but what we need to do is support the processes that are going on in the field in West Africa, try to listen and understand understand and do what we can to support the development and programs that are happening there. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to the moderator to say welcome to everyone. This is a continuation of a dialogue. I don't expect anyone to walk out with an answer if they know exactly what's going on, but hopefully with a little bit more understanding from people who have been studying it, people who have been living it every day. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. And thanks for everybody to be there today. Thanks also to the Partnership to Katanga and Poverty in Africa to welcome us. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Eric Azar. I'm working for Oxfam. I'm based in Dakar in Senegal since 12 years now. And I've been, unfortunately, seeing too many food crises in the region already that I've had to respond to some extent in terms of policy management. So I'm very pleased today to be here to try to make the moderation. So giving the moderation to a French-speaking is a pleasure for me. So I will try to do this as good as possible, and I hope that you will be able to understand my English. So I just would like to start by saying a few words about this panel today. This panel for Oxfam is part of a tour that we are doing, that we are organizing in North America. So we are here today. We will go to Canada late afternoon. And at the same time, we have also a similar tour in Europe and also in UK. This tour is co-organized with many organizations, firstly with Farmer Network in West Africa, which is the HOPA, and we do have the executive secretary right here, but also with some of the pastoralist networks such as Vietnam, Marobe, and so on. So the idea was really to try to ring the alarm about this crisis and to try to see how the response to this crisis up to date has been timely and adequate. So this is one of the things we will come back on. But more than this, I think it's really a longer question and a deeper and more complex question, as mentioned by the president of Partnership to Cut Poverty and Hunger in Africa. Let me just say a few words in introduction. So I think that the first signal of the crisis, as you all know, has been really identified in October or November. There have been a lot of discussion about is that a stable crisis, is that a looming crisis, what does the signal mean or not? I'll come back on that. But basically, from November 2011, we received the first information through the early warning system that there was a potential severe crisis were coming in West Africa. Basically, it's a good news, I would say. It's a good news compared to previous year when the early warning system were not able to give us the information, or when the early warning system was giving us the information, the political recognition and the translation in terms of political act from the government was sometimes quite slow. So I think that this year we have been able to react, and particularly the government in Africa has been able to react and to anticipate this crisis a little bit quicker than by the past. But at the same time, I think that we are really living in a region which is structurally vulnerable to any external shock, any minor shock. So if we just try to stick to the data, we can say that today we have more than 15 million people which are vulnerable or living or facing severe food insecurity in more than 7 countries, from Mauritania to Chad. Basically, all the Sahel is affected by the crisis. The Sahel is affected by a crisis which is due to different causes. First one is a deficit of the cereal production, a deficit of 2.5 million cereal production compared to last year. And in some countries, a deficit which is close to 50%, but the production of cereal being 50% less important than the previous year. I'm mentioning particularly Mauritania and Chad in that perspective. But it's not only a question of production. I think the production and the question of availability of the food has been part of the history of the crisis, but now we know that the crises are more complex. And that beyond that, there is also the question of accessibility to the food. So even if the market would be available to provide the needed food, today, unfortunately, the prices on the market remain abnormally quite high. If we compare to the average of the last 5 years, in countries like Niger, we have the price of cereal which are 30 to 40% higher. In countries such as Mali and Burkina, we have some price which are 50 to 60% higher. So that's another big issue. And when we're speaking about the complexity of the crisis, we need also to mention, to not forget that the crisis is not only affecting human people, but it's also affecting animals, it's also affecting livestock, which is a big component of the economy in many Sahaelian countries, such as Mali and so on. And today the lack of water, the lack of fodder and so on, is also a critical issue when we think about how we can respond to the crisis, but also how we can rebuild the capacity and the assets of the most vulnerable people in the near future. So basically, I think that, and this is one of the things we certainly discussed today, that we need to guarantee to have a timely and adequate response to this ongoing crisis. It's one of the things we have been discussing here in these few days, and we continue to discuss today with you and in the coming days. We need to ensure that the response will arrive on time, that we won't have the same problems that we have in the Horn of Africa, but will also be appropriate, maybe with some new tools, some new modalities, to be able to move to some in-kind of food aid, to some new modalities such as cash transfer, vouchers, and so on, something that I'm sure we will discuss right here. But in a West African context, I think the problem is not only to be able to respond to this crisis, we also need to be able to see how we can find solutions to escape this vicious cycle of hunger in West Africa. This is, I think, one of the key questions we need to be able to address. The response is not a simple one. The response won't be done in the next few months or few weeks' time. That's clear. But it should be part of the agenda of all organizations which are here and also organizations which are not here. So basically, the question, one of the questions we would like also to address today is how we can reconcile the long-term and the short-term agenda in the way we do intervene, how basically we can build the pathway for resilience for the most vulnerable people who for sure will be affected by another crisis in the coming years. The only question is when. So basically, I think this is two of the questions we will try to touch this morning with our different panelists. We certainly also have a quick discussion we certainly touch also the issue of Mali, political context, and what is the impact of this crisis. But to do so, we have different panelists who will make some keynote remarks, and some of them will make also some comments. So let me just start by introducing the two first panelists. And I think that we will start with Mamadou Issoufou. Mamadou Issoufou is the Executive Director of the Federation of Union of Farmer Groups in Niger, FUGPN. He has a long experience in Niger on the ground, and I think he will have 12 minutes now to share with us his view from a Niger perspective and from a farmer perspective about what could be the response to those different questions and how we can escape from this vicious cycle of hunger. Thanks. Issoufou.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I don't understand English, so
Je remercie les dames et
I thank the ladies and gentlemen from the United States who came here.
on va pas faire un grand discours, juste pour leur faire comprendre ce qui se passe hier. Ce qu'on a la crise alimentaire, d'où est-ce qu'il vient, qu'est-ce qui est à la base, quelles sont les conséquences et quelles sont les mesures qu'il faut prendre pour couper ce cycle de crise alimentaire.
So I'm not going to make a long speech. I'm just going to tell you what is happening, where it is happening, what are the consequences, and what are the measures to be taken so that you can once and for all break this cycle of hunger that keeps happening.
Avant de rentrer, j'ai vu que nous sommes les concernés par tout. Donc nous sommes touchés directement par cette crise. Nous sommes producteurs, agriculteurs, éleveurs, pêcheurs, agriculteurs.
Before starting, I can tell you that we are the first to be concerned because we are farmers. We are the producers. We are the producers. We also are pastoralists. We are the fishermen. And so we are the first front line.
Alors, comment se présente la crise présentement au Niger? Il faut rappeler qu'il y a eu un déficit de 500 000 tonnes, soit 14% des besoins au Niger. Ça, c'est les besoins céréaliers. Vous avez aussi un déficit fourrager estimé à 10 millions de tonnes. Ça, c'était en décembre 2011. Donc, vous voyez, ces déficits vont engendrer une crise alimentaire qui est due aux difficultés d'approvisionnement en céréales, parce que les zones dans lesquelles nous pouvons nous approvisionner, ça ne marche pas. Il s'agit du Nigeria où il y a Boko Haram, la Libye où il y avait la guerre, et au Mali aussi où maintenant il y avait la comment on appelle, il y a la guerre, il y a tout le temps. Donc vous voyez, ceci vient davantage augmenter la vulnérabilité des Nigériens à la crise alimentaire.
So what is the nature of the crisis? It's the fact that we have a grain deficit of 520,000 tons, that is 14% of our usual need. But not only in grain, but also in fodder. We can't feed our animals because we are missing 10 million tons as of December 2011. The crisis comes from a lack of supply because all our neighbors from which we could also have supplies right now are kind of blocked and are not functioning. If you take Nigeria, for instance, there's Boko Haram, which is traffic. You have Libya, which is just coming out of war. Mali, which has just had a coup d'etat. And all this is increasing the vulnerability of the people in Niger.
Donc, c'est pas seulement les personnes qui vivent cette crise, même les animaux.
So it's not only impacting the people, but also all the animals.
Alors, en décembre 2011, quand ça a été évalué, nous étions 6 millions de personnes qui sont vulnérables en décembre 2011, qui veut dire qu'aujourd'hui, sûrement, le nombre a augmenté compte tenu de conditions de cas.
So in December 2011, we were 6 million people we estimated were impacted by this crisis. But given all the events around Niger, you can count that this number is much higher today.
Et plus de 80% de ces vulnérables-là sont dans le monde rural.
And over 80% of these people who are vulnerable live in a rural area.
Donc, alors, quelles sont les conséquences de cette crise présentement? Quand vous rentrez au Niger, vous commencez à voir ces conséquences-là qui sont, de un, dans le village, vous avez l'abandon scolaire. Les enfants n'ont plus de quoi manger, leurs pères ne peuvent plus les nourrir, ils sont obligés de descendre en ville pour chercher de quoi manger et puis amener à leurs parents. Et deuxièmement, vous avez, dès que vous rentrez à Niamey, qui est la capitale, au niveau des ronds-points, vous allez voir qu'il y a beaucoup de gens qui mendient. Aussi, la chose la plus fâcheuse que moi je n'aime pas voir, c'est l'augmentation de la prostitution. Et qui va augmenter, si on ne fait pas attention, le nombre de VIH-Sida au Niger. Parce que les femmes qui sont mariées, les jeunes filles, dans le village, sont obligées de venir en ville pour commander, pour faire la prostitution.
So what are the consequences of this famine that is now striking the country? The consequences in Niger are really pretty bad. If you go to villages, for instance, all over Niger, you see that schools are closed. Why is school closed? Because the parents cannot feed their children. And everybody's moving to town, moving to the city. Then if you go to Niamey, for instance, the first thing you do, which is the capital of Niger, you will see in the roundabout a whole lot of people who are begging. You see beggars. You see that all over the big city. But the worst, what I really hate to see now, is that you see a whole lot of prostitution. Why? Because the women, the wives, the young girls can no longer sustain themselves in villages. They also move to the city, and besides begging, what else can they do? But they prostitute themselves, which has a direct bearing on the increase of HIV/AIDS.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire maintenant?
So what should we be doing today?
Pour ne pas aggraver davantage la situation.
So that we don't make it worse.
Nous, les organisations paysannes, nous avons trouvé avec partenaires, nous avons, dès décembre 2011, nous avons mis en place un plan de contingence.
So what should we do? Well, we, the farmers organization, with the help of organizations such as Oxfam and CFD and WFP, we have worked together and set up a contingency plan.
Donc, ce qui est important, avant 2010, le gouvernement ne reconnaissait pas la faim. C'est ça, c'est très important que cette année, il a reconnu qu'il a faim 2 août. Et ça, c'est grâce à notre organisation qui les a informés des signes précurseurs de la crise.
So what is very important is that until 2010, the government refused to recognize there was any harm. They didn't want to know about it. But now things have changed, and since August, they have listened to us because we had an early warning system that told us that famine was coming. We told the government, and they listened to us.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire maintenant?
So what should we be doing
Il y a
today?
des actions à entreprendre pour permettre le relèvement des producteurs, pour permettre le relèvement des femmes, pour permettre le relèvement des enfants, pour permettre aux enfants de partir à l'école, pour permettre aux femmes de ne pas se protéger.
So there are several actions that need to be taken right now in order to help the producers to stand back on their feet again, to help women to get back to the villages, kids to follow them, and reopen our schools and stop the spreading of prostitution.
Donc la première action à faire, comme on sait que la crise est structurelle, c'est de faire des actions de récupération des sols. Parce que nous savons que nous sommes dans un climat où nos sols se dégradent. Donc, en faisant des actions de récupération des sols, pas de cash forward, transfer forward, food forward, alors là, ceux qui ont quitté les villages vont revenir au village pour travailler et ils ont de quoi acheter un temps soit de la route.
So what do we have to do is attack the structural problem. We have to, for instance, revalorize and recoup our soil, which have been very degraded, through cash forward, transfer forward, food forward system, so that the farmers can go back to their villages, reopen their schools, and bring their kids back.
Donc, il ne s'agit pas seulement de les faire les aider à se relever. Il y a la saison hivernale qui va venir dans 2 mois. Alors, ils n'ont pas de quoi entamer cette saison hivernale. Raison pour laquelle il faut entreprendre des actions de production agricole et pastorale. Par exemple, en mettant à la disposition de ce que nous appelons des semences d'urgence, des engrais d'urgence, etc., etc.
So among the things that we should do, for instance, because we know that the winter planting season is coming in 2 months and the farmers can't even start doing anything. So it's not enough to just put them back on their feet. You also have to help them with agricultural actions to help them with the livestock through emergency seed, emergency fertilizer, and so on and so forth.
Donc, comme vous avez vu, les femmes sont les plus vulnérables, les femmes sont les plus victimes. Alors, il faut initier dès maintenant ce que nous appelons dans notre jargon les activités génératrices de revenus uniquement pour les femmes.
So, since, as you have seen, women are the first ones to be the victim, they are the most hit by the crisis, we have to start immediately income-generating activities.
D'une manière générale, il faut renforcer les capacités de résilience et de résilience.
Generally speaking, you have to do capacity strengthening for resiliency to disaster.
Ça, ce sont les actions qu'il faut entreprendre dès maintenant.
These are the actions
Et même en retard.
today. We're even late.
Maintenant, qu'est-ce que nous voulons faire, nous les autres? Qu'est-ce que nous, on a vu que si on fait ça, il n'y aura plus de crise.
So what should we do? Also, the farmers organization, we have seen a few things that need to be done so that at least there won't be any crisis in Niger anymore.
Je crois qu'il y a 3 actes stratégiques qu'il faut mettre en œuvre.
There are 3 strategic axes that need to be implemented.
Le premier acte stratégique, c'est l'amélioration des services économiques des producteurs.
Number 1, first axis is the improvement of economic services to the producers.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a là-dedans? L'accès au crédit,
What do we mean? Credit
qui
action,
permet d'avoir des semences, des intrants, des matériels à l'emploi et qui permet aussi de faire la production agricole. Sans l'accès du financement à l'agriculture, on ne peut pas rompre.
So we need a better access to credit so that we can buy seeds, fertilizer, and the agricultural tools that we need. With that access to credit, you can't even start thinking of breaking the internal cycle.
Donc, ce qui veut dire qu'il faut un appui constant pendant un certain temps à la production agricole, à la commercialisation, à la production pastorale.
So it means that we need to have a constant support to agricultural production, to animal husbandry, and to the agricultural trade also in our products.
Donc, ce qui veut aussi, je ne vais pas entrer dans toutes les actions, mais le deuxième axe, il y a la défense et la promotion des intérêts et des droits de l'agriculteur. Il faut que l'agriculteur soit reconnu comme une profession. Quand vous prenez ici, aux États-Unis, le fils du président n'a pas honte de dire que lui est président. Alors qu'en Afrique, tu as honte de dire que moi je suis fils de président. Alors le fils docteur, lui, moi je suis fils de docteur. Donc vous voyez, il faut professionnaliser l'agriculture. Il faut que nous ayons des intérêts, il faut que nous défendons les intérêts et les membres de ces producteurs-là. En faisant quoi? Je veux retenir 2 actions. Il faut que les politiques, nous les intégrons. Ça c'est un. De la gouvernance, il faut que tu tiennes compte de nos amis. Et deuxièmement, il faut que nous ayons un appui institutionnel et organisationnel. C'est ça que moi j'ai résumé en amélioration de la profession agricole au Sahel.
So the second axis is the defense and support of the rights of farmers. Because in Africa, to be a farmer, to be working in agriculture is not really recognized as a profession. Here in the U.S., if your father is a farmer, you are not ashamed to say, my dad is a farmer, I grew up in a farm. Well, in Africa, it's a shame. We don't say that. We could say my dad is a doctor, but nobody would confess that they come from agricultural family. So we need to revalorize the profession and make it recognized and recognize its right. Number two, politicians should listen to us. We should count for something. In the governance of the country, we should have our word. We should have our say in different decisions. And also, we should have institutional support as farmers' organizations.
Le troisième axe, c'est le renforcement des capacités. Les autres criminels sont en train de s'organiser pour qu'on les atteigne. Alors, pour qu'on les accompagne dans cette organisation. Je vais vous donner une information qui est peut-être plus importante. Nous, notre organisation, nous avons profité du coup d'État de 2010 pour introduire dans la Constitution le droit à l'alimentation, ce qui n'était pas le cas depuis l'indépendance jusqu'à 2010. Donc ça, je crois que c'est très important. Et présentement, nous sommes en train de préparer le projet de loi nous permettant d'appliquer cet article de la Constitution.
So the third axis is to bring support to organizations such as mine, farmers' organization. I'm going to give you an information that maybe you don't have yet. We took advantage of the coup in 2010 to write in the Constitution the right to food for every citizen, which had never been recognized in independence in Niger. And right now we are helping to prepare a bill that is going to see to the implementation of this right to food for everybody.
Donc, pour conclure, je veux dire une truc, c'est pas qu'on nous participe dans les stratégies et politiques, mais que nous participons dans les stratégies politiques de développement agricole. Merci beaucoup.
So in conclusion, I'm going to say that what matters the most is that we're involved. We should be involved at all levels in the decision-making process, the political decision-making process, the strategic decision-making process, for everything that deals with agriculture. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mamadou. I think it's a good starting point in terms of some direction we could take to be able to respond to the needs now, but also in the longer term perspective, how we can ensure that we will collectively, and particularly taking into consideration the role of the farmers' organization in terms of strengthening the capacity to ensure that they can also play their own role to be able to better respond to the crisis tomorrow. Let me continue and introduce my friend, Mr. Mohamedou Goïta. Mohamedou Goïta is the Executive Secretary of the ROPA, which is a farmer networks for West Africa. He is also the Director of the Institute for Research and the Promotion of Alternative in Development, based in Mali, Bamako. He is a development socio-economist and a specialist in education and training system. Mohamedou has a strong and long experience of working with farmers' organizations on the ground to also respond to different food crises on the ground. So I'm really pleased to let him do his presentation now. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. I will be very, very short just to allow to have more questions. Knowing that I'm from Mali, probably you have so many questions for my country. So I won't elaborate more on that. Just tell you that we are facing now this multidimensional crisis, and three of them are the most important ones. We are facing a political crisis. So this is the basis of the debate. Some people will think, why a coup d'etat in a country where we have all this democratic process, we have election every 5 years, there is a new president coming. We were just 2 months before. But I think that we avoided the worst. Now we have a bad, but we avoided the worst. It's a development problem. And we need to question the key causes, because the coup for me is a consequence of some situation. Democracy is not only elections, but it's also what are the basic economic background the processes where we are engaged in, and how can we sustain them? Because it's really surprising for me as a Malian that face a coup d'etat. It's at the first level, we may find it as a shame for the democratic process of our country. And secondly, we said that it will stop some processes where we are in. But if we stop and think about some of the key things that happened for the last period in our country, we say probably we need to question again the foundations of our democratic processes. And it can help to draw lessons from that and move forward. Because this is a situation that exists now. It's happened. When it's happened, then let's try to see how we can move from it and in which way to make a sustainable way of developing our economies and to handle our development processes. The second dimension is a humanitarian one. We all know that already this country was in a food crisis. It's not because there is not enough production. The level of production was lower than last year. Last year was an exceptional year. We had more than 2 million tons extra production last year. So this year we have about something like between 25 to 35% less than last year's production. But this production is enough to feed the population. But the big majority cannot afford it. So this is a difference. If you look at the trend of production in Sahel countries, a country like Mali, production was going up. But at the same time, access to this food has become very critical because prices are up because of some of the external conditions also, but also internal conditions that exist that cannot allow a big majority of the population to access to it. Unfortunately for us, this humanitarian situation that we have has been deepened by what's happened in the north and eastern part of the country. So we all know that also it's an issue of governance, because security cannot be separated for development issues in countries like Mali. We have 7 countries as neighbors. And between these 7 countries, we all know there are some big ones, like Niger and Algeria, and Mauritania also. And in all these countries, we have the same problem with Niger, because the rebellions took place simultaneously in Mali and Niger for a very long time. We know that Algeria, for the last 15 years, has been fighting against different groups that are changing species of life. They are changing places, they are changing configurations, and also we have Mauritania with all the situations that we have in this country. But also at the same time, people have to know that in terms of food, Mali is a provider of food for Niger and for Mauritania mainly. And as the second livestock in the region, Mali is also providing a lot of meat to Cote d'Ivoire, to Togo, to Benin, to Guinea, Conakry, and so on and so forth, in addition to Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. So just to give you an example, when we had this crisis, in 2 days, when Cote d'Ivoire closed the border closed, so there was no movement of cattle from Mali to Cote d'Ivoire. In 2 days, the price of meat moved from 2,000 to 2,700. This is just for 2 days. Just to show you the impact of this crisis in different neighboring countries. And we all know that each year Mali is providing cereal to Mauritania, because this country is more a cattle breeding country than suitable or cereal. So the humanitarian situation has been more difficult to handle, because now insecurity is in this region. We are even not sure if you bring today food to the population of Gao, Timbuktu, and Kidal, if they can access to it, because we don't know who is ruling in these regions. Mainly for Timbuktu, Gao, they destroy infrastructures, the hospital, the banking system, and all the public services have been completely destroyed. Timbuktu, they are fighting each other there, because we said that there are 4 groups, now we have almost 5 groups. Even MLR is divided into 2 different groups now. So we don't know, even drinking food. This means that in addition to access to food, we need to have a security corridor to allow humanitarian corridor to access to the population, because the most vulnerable part of this population is in these those who stay. And the problem cannot be handled also in a national basis, because we have more than 250,000 people in Niger. This is adding problem to the Niger case. We have more than 120 people in Mauritania already, and Burkina is hosting, I don't know exactly how many Malians who left the country because of this problem, and then went to Burkina Faso. So this is just to talk about the Malian case, and we have a military crisis. We all realize that also we have to support our democracy with some kind of security. Because for a long time, Mali has been a space for negotiation, for kidnapped people, hostages, and all these things that happen in the country. And then also we have been facing this situation from Libya. Why? Because Mali doesn't have any border with Libya. To come to Mali from Libya, you have to go to Niger or you have to go to Algeria. How come all these arms came in our country for more than 6 months without any reaction? So this is the key question that we need to ask ourselves. Can we go in a democratic process with a country like Mali with 7 countries at the border, with insecurity and all this drug traffic and all this kind of smuggling and things in the north and east, we are protecting also, have a good condition for the army to work, to do its job, that is protecting the country in terms of security. So this is some quick question that we need to ask ourselves. There is a last crisis. Hopefully by now it's not visible, but it may happen. This is the social crisis. When we say Tuareg rebel from Tuareg groups, this means that we are speaking out a specific community in the country. And this community is not the only one living in the north and the eastern part of the country. So it may create a clash between communities in our country. Hopefully by now, people know that the rebel groups, when we say Tuareg rebels, it's not only Tuaregs that are involved. People know that. Hopefully. But we hope that in sorting out the different political issues, we may resolve the problem in the social, the coexistence of communities in this region. So this is the most important one that we need to tackle very early to avoid all these problems in the case of Mali. Just to come back to the food crisis at regional level, we all know that it's a matter of structural debate. How can we organize so that we have conditions within the region to face this kind of crisis that will happen very frequently in Sahel countries? We know if we take the region per se, that the production can be enough, even though there is a need to invest a lot in production area in this country. Because West Africa, we have 2 kinds of countries. We have Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Ghana, and all these coastal countries, where usually the production is good. So we have the Sahel countries. Mali, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Niger. Mauritania being, it's not a member, but it's considered to be West Africa, with Niger and Guinea-Bissau and Senegal. These countries sometimes have difficulties because of climate change issue, because of many different causes that we can talk about here. So when we take globally West Africa, just to give you an example, in 2009-2010, the region has produced 59 million tons of cereal. This is about 25% more than the need of a country. But if you look at how we organize the movement of this product from one country to another, it doesn't exist. There is a big problem. This is why, as farmers' organization, we are engaged with ECOWAS to work on the food reserve initiatives. Unfortunately, we have 4 initiatives in the region that are not coherent at all. You know that when we talk about food reserve, we have the three lines. You have the three lines. The first one is community food reserves. These are cereal banks and food stocks and then farmer stock that exist at local level. We need to have a coherent perspective between these and the second level, that is the national stock. In all the Sahel countries, there is theoretically a national stock that can at least allow the population to sustain for between 3 and 6 months when there is any food crisis. But this is theoretical. Only in 3 countries you have stocks for this period. And this stock should give 5% to the regional solidarity issue. In case there is a problem in Niger, all these 5 countries should just take 5% of their stock and give it to Niger. But unfortunately, this stock, because of management issues, doesn't exist in most of the countries. 50% should be physical stock, and 50% should be financial stock. That too is in a bank, and it is supposed to be mobilized when there is need to buy food in other countries. But you look at all these countries, this stock doesn't exist. So this means that there is a lot to do in that sense. At regional level, we have 4 initiatives now, and we want to build a regional food reserve. So we have SILS is working in one process, that is Resources. This is the network of national stocks, just to bring them together. Secondly, you have these initiatives from WAEU, West African Economic and Monetary Union, that bring together all the 8 Francophone countries in West Africa using the same currency. That's a very problematic space, economic and integration space. It's a very problematic one because it's around Francophone countries. And secondly, it's related to France. And it's a very big problem for all of us. The third initiative is about what the G20 is doing via WFP, World Food Program. And the framework exists already. And we said that the best thing that we can do in this process is to bring the leadership of the food reserve to ECOWAS. Because we have a program, a common agricultural program that is called ECOWAP. And within ECOWAP, we have 2 main tools. The first one is the Regional Agricultural Investment Program. That includes also the food reserve issue. And the second one is the national, all the national agricultural investment program that exists in all the West African countries, even though the processes have to be redefined because most of the players didn't participate to identify the priorities in this national agricultural investment program. But at least these are tools where we can have space to discuss. And the last initiative is the initiative from ECOWAS itself for the food reserve issue. So this initiative should be supported for a long-term management of crises in this region. Because we can have enough resources for the reserve if we agree on to answer to some quick questions. What kind of food reserve do you want? You know that there are 2 types. The first one is food reserve for crisis. So we don't need to have a huge quantity of cereal. We just take the need for the population for 2 or 3 months. In case there is a problem in one country, we will mobilize these resources to help them. And the second one is a food reserve that is used to regulate the market. In case there is a problem, you can just use this reserve. And to do that, you have to have at least 10 to 20% of the food need of the region in this food reserve. So these are some of the things that we need really to work on to see how we can sustain our own responses to this food crisis and to invest on agriculture. We all know that in West Africa, the big majority of producers are small-scale farmers. And ROPA is this regional network for these small-scale farmers. We need to invest in production. We need to invest on processing food in the region. This means that agro-industry has to come back. They all have been privatized in the 80s. We need to work on that, otherwise we cannot develop agriculture in our country. And finally, we need to organize the market. And this market has to be also the one that will take care about the local market first. We cannot jump from production from the field to the international market. The local market has to be organized. To organize the national market for food and then the regional market. We have enough just to circulate in the region, and we need support, not as food mainly, but as financial resources to organize all these things. So I will stop here, hoping that probably there will be a question that I can answer to if you want. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Goita, and thanks to, I would say, both Mamadou for this introduction remark, which are quite clear, which clearly give a better understanding of the West African perspective so far, where we are, better understanding of the situation, and to some extent of the need, as mentioned by Mohamedou Issoufou. As you can understand, that's not a simple but a very complex situation with a triple crisis, considering what Mr. Goita was saying, humanitarian crisis with a political crisis, and to some extent a social one. So I think we have a better understanding now about where we are from a West African perspective. Before going to some question and answer with the public, I would first let the opportunity to Gary Ehlert from FuseNet to try to comment, respond, but also give us, provide us some trend and focus analysis about what about the future. If you are speaking about a crisis, but if you are also speaking about resilience, if you want to build a resilience, what are the key trends that we need to take into consideration for the future? And after we'll have the opportunity also to listen our colleague from OFDA about basically what has been the US response to date to be able to make its contribution to this crisis. So I would like first to let Gary Ehlert, who is the USAID Program Manager for Famine Early Warning System Network, FuseNet, as known as FuseNet. He's responsible for overall management and implementation of the activity of the 6 principal FuseNet team member, which provide on-the-ground coverage of 20 countries and remote monitoring and situation in other 11 countries. So Gary, I think you have 7 minutes to try to give us some perspective on the future. Thanks.
Well, thank you all. And I think this is a great setting to discuss the complexities that we've been discussing. Several of the discussants have already raised the need to look at this situation with some amount of nuance to better understand what is the correct response. We have been here before. Three times out of the last 6 or 7 years, we've faced a similar situation. Well, what is not working and what is working? I'd like to run through a number of different pictures about the types of issue that we're facing, and hopefully with the objective of providing you with some of the nuances that we also think are important in the situation. And I've titled this Niger 11-12, an exceptional crisis. I'm focusing on Niger as kind of the core of the issue in the Sahel. It's slightly different in other countries, but I think what I'll try to present here are the structural issues that we're facing all across the Sahel, and for which I think the real key issue is why does it matter to make any differentiation between what the causes are? It matters because we intend to do something about it. And if you intend to do something about it, you have to know what the real problem is. We have been here how many times before delivering resources to a problem that remains. All of our discussants have agreed this is a structural issue. So we need to understand what is structural and what is emergency and make sure that the response that we provide is appropriate for both of those situations. And we have no doubt that there are both situations in the Sahel currently. There are acute issues, there are structural issues, but we need to make sure that we know where each one is and address each one of them in the way that it merits. So I'm going to run through, I'll be like a snake oil salesman because I have a lot of little slides here. It'll go too fast, I'm sure, for all of you, but I'd be happy to provide you all with the presentation if you'd like afterwards. So looking at, these are the typical indicators that we look at in terms of the crisis. And looking at the national harvest in a row, you know, our discussant already mentioned that last year was a very good year in the Sahel. So this year was not. But in terms of net cereal and how it compares to the average,
it's relatively average over a 5-year period. You know, what is true about the situation is that the farmers in Niger have been very successful at raising their production. I spent 6 years working in Zimbabwe. The maximal amount of grain produced in Zimbabwe at any point in past history was 2.9 million tons. We now have a situation where Niger and Mali are regularly producing almost 5 million tons of grain a year. We look at the per capita issue as well. People know that the growth rate is really substantial in this area. Well, on a per capita basis, what's happening? I think that you'll note year by year there's a great variation. So how exceptional is the current year? Look at that final part of the graph there, and you'll see that it's really not that exceptional. In fact, the more exceptional thing is perhaps the fact that 2 out of the last 4 years were really exceptionally good production years. How exceptional is the cereal balance? Well, the Sahel is such that all farmers have to live with the market. They produce a certain amount of food for their families, and hopefully they're able to sell some, but they exist with the help of the market. The market is critically important, as our discussant has just mentioned. And we have to make sure that that market functions in order for the cereal balance to make up for the inevitable deficits of production in the region. Pastoral production as well. You know, we have some indicators that are fairly difficult to interpret. How different was this year from an average year? If you look at Tillaberi, Dosso, Tawa, Maradi, what we did was we just looked at how different the situation was in terms of the vegetative cover. It's within a few percentage points of normal. So, you know, the question is what amount of stress is being found where. The reason you're a pastoralist is because you do move when situations are bad for you. You move to another area. We have to be very careful how we conceive of the problem in order to address it well. Is it really a lack of vegetative cover, or is it a structural issue that is a longer-term issue? Poor harvest. This is, you know, the thing that's really exceptional about the crisis this year are the high prices. And I think that there are some really important things that we notice in what's happening. And first is that since the 2008 food fuel finance crisis, there has been a different valuation of cereals in the world. It's like they're two different systems. And you'll also notice in that second part of the curve that there's still a seasonal curve. It's still the Sahel being the Sahel. Prices go up at one point and they go down. But underlying that, there is an amount of external energy that is driving prices. How different is this? Well, if you compare it to the FAO Food Price Index, you'll see that it's quite different. In fact, it's less volatile, which is maybe surprising to some. If you compare it to the rest of Africa, you'll note that in terms of the prices that we're facing today in the Sahel, they have been less volatile and less high in their rises than Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. Not intending here to diminish the impact this has on families, but we need to understand that there's a broader issue occurring in markets which is affecting everybody in the world. And there is a strength being shown in the Sahel in these graphs that I've just shown you. There's a rising production, there's a functioning market. We need to be able to protect that in order to build on its strengths. Have the prices been exceptionally volatile? We all know that volatile prices are another issue. It's not just how high they are, it's how fast they change. And you'll see that in terms of how many markets are having large price increases, over the last several years, the volatility, the last year or so in particular, the volatility has been relatively minor. I'll be happy to share the way that we measure that as well to anybody. Pastoral terms of trade. How badly are pastoralists being hurt by the differences between the value of their animals versus the value of the grain that they have to buy? You'll see that we're relatively normal over the last few years. Are the prices escalating towards a crisis? This goes through March, or actually February, but the March picture is the same. So you'll see that they rose very high in November, December, and then they started falling. And they're back towards a normal pattern of escalation. That doesn't mean that they're back to a normal price level. It means that they're traveling at a normal level. This is a market functioning at a higher level of pricing, but it's not a marketing crisis in that sense. Malnutrition Treatment Center admissions. How exceptional is this? You know, we've used this in the past as a measure of food insecurity in Niger. Well, you see that those numbers don't really correspond well to the moments of stress in Niger. They're driven by other factors. They're driven by the availability of food and other resources in the centers. In fact, the moment of highest increase in the admissions was in 2010, the year of the great production. That was the record year of production. They've been coming down recently. How do we explain that in terms of our vision of what the crisis is in Niger today? Malnutrition survey results. You know, there have only been a few, but if you look at the trends there over the last several years, you'll see that there's not much variation. This is not very exceptional, except you'll note in the only two that have been held this year, in Tillabéri and Agadez, they were very moderate or actually going down. My point is not that the situation is good. My point is that the situation is normal in a sense that we need to treat it because it's an emergency all the time. The food consumption scores. Look at the 2011 scores. Look at the way that they're measured. Acceptable is greater than 42. The national average is 50.3. How do we interpret that? And how do we respond to the situation that is reflecting? It's important, it's critically important that we understand the nature of the problem that is being expressed in the Sahel today. And I think that we continue to feel at FuseNet that we have not adequately presented the problem to the decision makers in a way that we are going to drive the appropriate response. And we're also very concerned that our actions in terms of response don't make the situation worse. So there in a very short presentation, that is the logic of where FuseNet sees the situation in the Sahel and the messaging that we provide to the people that we provide information to. That is the message we're providing. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks Gary for this very interesting analysis, because I'm sure we'll provoke a lot of discussion and debate. Let me now move to Fiona Shanks, which is the team leader for West and Southern Africa for USAID, Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistant. She's responsive or in charge of emergency and response and disaster risk reductions for more than 20 countries. So I think that it's the right person to give us a quick and up-to-date information of or analysis of what has been the U.S. response to this crisis at this moment, and also in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality and maybe in terms of the future. And Fiona, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the partnership and Oxfam and CARE for organizing this event and inviting us to participate. I think it's very timely. The food crisis in the Sahel is getting a lot of attention. It sees the U.S. government in terms of our overall response, and we are certainly looking to make sure we have a targeted and appropriate response to this emergency. On that, I'll just give a few notes about our current response as it stands, and then also react to some of the comments made by the other presenters. And I need to just reiterate that I represent the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance within USAID, which is in charge of the emergency humanitarian response. Do not represent the development side of our agency, although I will touch a little bit upon that. And we also work closely with the Office of Food for Peace within USAID, which delivers food assistance both in kind and cash. I can include some of that in our overall assistance, but I can't answer maybe some more pointed questions about the food response specifically. So USAID is responding to food insecurity and acute malnutrition in the Sahel through a rapid, targeted, and market-sensitive program to respond to critical needs while building resilience. We've contributed more than $200 million in new and ongoing funding to support agriculture, food security, economic recovery, and nutrition interventions throughout the Sahel. Many of these programs build upon programs that we instituted with our partners dating back to 2008. So to address the idea of are we responding quickly Are we appropriate in being seized with this matter? That will reflect that. We have been building these programs, increasing funding when needed in the years that are bad, but this is an ongoing response to Sahel. It is not all new interventions this year. That is all new funding for this year, but the interventions are building on what we've already worked out with our partners. I'm going to address Mali briefly because I'm sure it'll come up in questions. Humanitarian assistance, including food assistance, has not been suspended in Mali following the recent coup. We are advocating strongly for that position. It's the policy of the U.S. government that humanitarian assistance needs to continue, both for the populations impacted by the food crisis, which we've been discussing, as well as populations impacted by the conflict and displacement in the north. This is all conditional on access, however. Building resilience of beneficiaries has been a critical component of USAID's emergency response in the Sahel for some time. Ongoing non-food programs responding to the crisis in the Sahel help build resilience while also meeting immediate needs. I'm going to give a few quick examples that are just illustrative of the type of programming my office is doing in the Sahel. In Burkina Faso, we're supporting the training of community health workers in the management of acute malnutrition, including improving national health staff capacity to respond to acute malnutrition. In Niger, we're restoring livelihoods and increasing resilience in some of the most food insecure areas through agriculture and economic recovery activities, including temporary employment, training in agricultural production techniques, cash for work, to increase purchasing power of vulnerable populations, while rehabilitating degraded communal lands to help ensure improved pasture for livestock in the coming years. Also in Niger, we're supporting cash transfer programs to help the most vulnerable populations access food and basic goods which are available in the local market, including seeds and tools, to prevent families from relying on negative coping mechanisms. These programs complement the Office of Food for Peace's emergency food security program through targeted cash-based activities for the most vulnerable. As Gary mentioned, we recognize that the causes of hunger and malnutrition in the Sahel are deeply rooted and multifaceted, and malnutrition is a chronic problem. We look at all of our programs not just to deliver food, either in kind or even cash, but also to look at the underlying causes of malnutrition, including water and sanitation improvement, hygiene practices, access to the right types of food. We look at a holistic response to really break out of the emergency cycle. A few comments on what some of the speakers mentioned. I do think we are all in agreement about the need for a timely and adequate response. I feel that our response, as it goes back to 2008, certainly launched in earnest in November with new funding for our fiscal year, is timely. On the Office of Food for Peace, the in-kind food assistance is coinciding with the lean season. Before that, there was an effort to make sure the food assistance was cash to support the local markets and not cause undue disruption to those markets. Eric mentioned the need for new tools and modalities, cash transfers, vouchers. These have underpinned our response for many years. In Niger, it's been a particular focus of cash, and 2 years ago we organized a conference of other donors and our implementing partners to speak specifically about innovations in cash programming in Niger. So it's something our office supports to a great deal. I think to respond to the comment about the new government in Niger and the fact that it's listening for the first time, that enabled us a few years ago to really ramp up our response in Niger, and it's been a robust response for the whole international community on the emergency side for some years. And the ability of national governments to facilitate access for international actors to come in, the ability for us to engage with the government to really build our programming is essential, and I think it's making Niger a success in terms of our emergency response and our position there. Sorry, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Conversely, in Mali, the lack of access is certainly impeding our ability to respond as robustly as we would like to. We are positioned to do more in Mali. for the conflict affected, but that will depend on the ability of humanitarian actors to reach those populations in need. I'll just conclude by saying USAID wants to break the cycle of emergency response in the Sahel. We are building resilience at all levels. We're trying to support communities, the host governments, and regional institutions to do this. The initiatives and proposals by our two keynote speakers are encouraging. We need to continue to mobilize the international response to support these initiatives and directions. And as Michelle noted, it's not a simple answer or a simple solution, but I do feel that there's broad agreement on what the challenges are, and more importantly, a strong will within the international community and a determination to effect lasting change in the Sahel. I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So I think we had a good set of introduction now. We'll have 25 minutes to go to some question and answer. I think there is different things which do appear. So one of the things is that response to date and the response from US seems to be quite good in terms of timely response, level of the response. At the same time, we can acknowledge also that based on UN data, early January, the need for West Africa was $724 million US. On April 5, the pledging which was done by the different donors was $354 million. So we can see that there was a gap. And at the same time, we know that there has been a deterioration of the situation on the ground, which means that the next evaluation will certainly be closer to $1 billion needs to be able to respond to this crisis and to the 15 million affected by the food insecurity in the Sahel. So how also we can address that, how we can be able to ensure that beyond the effort done by the traditional donors, US but also European community, some of the donors can join the effort. I think that's one of the things. The second, which is clearly, it seems that the complex situation and the deterioration of the political situation in Mali, but also to some extent the difficulties that we have been facing in northern Nigeria, which have been closing its border and so on, I would say has impact on the market and the fluidity of the market, but also has a serious impact on the capacity to reach the most vulnerable people and to reach some of the people which are affected. So to what extent corridors, humanitarian corridors could be needed. But I think that there is a third point also which do emerge from this discussion, which is clearly around building this resilience by having a holistical approach. I think that Mamadou Goïta has been touching a little bit this food and ag policy, the ECOWA policy, which have been developed in West Africa, how we can ensure that in the long-term perspective we'll be able to invest more in some social protection program and so on. So these are some of the questions which do emerge, but I would like now to go back to the public to let you know if you have some questions. So maybe I will take a first list of 3 questions and give the opportunity to the panelists to respond. So if you can just introduce yourself when you have a question, and for the question, yes, please. Yes, sir.
Steve Myers from the Alliance to End Hunger. This one's actually specifically for Gary. Anyway, I want to make sure that I'm connecting the dots from your presentation correctly. 2 conclusions that I drew from the information you presented were, one, that for the most part, markets in the region are operating effectively, and that 2, although prices for commodities are, in fact, historically high, that represents effectively a new normal. Are both of those conclusions correct? Okay, so then I have 2 thoughts about that. One is, if those markets are operating correctly, are you suggesting that an infusion of food aid runs the risk of disrupting those markets moving forward?
And secondly, if those prices represent a new normal, and what actions do humanitarian and development actors need to take to improve the people's access to food based on those new normal prices?
Okay, thanks. Very clear question. Yeah, please. Is that? Yeah.
I'm Andrea. I'm curious to know the impact of the forum, what population how that's impacting population. I guess
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
Paul Bennett, ECGS. I'm questioning whether, in fact, the remittance markets are working well. I think that there is a suggestion and an opening for commodities not moving from areas of surplus to areas of deficit. Perhaps there could be some further discussion about what markets working well means. There certainly is some trades, but there continue to be state-specific responses and export bans and trades. Lack of infrastructure or economic incentive for transporters, for traders to move that food from areas of surplus to areas of deficit. I question whether markets are working well.
Okay. So thanks. I think we stop here for the first meet. So maybe, yeah.
follow up on that.
Yes, please. Put a question.
Neyman Nedeljkovic, one of the production side of the Czech group of West Africa in agricultural production, right, various commodities. But the point that I wanted to follow up with what Paul was saying, and tying in with the Boyta's remark on the small-scale farmers that bringing them up into the value chain. And if we've now finally, thankfully, accepted the fact that it's not an unusual crisis, it's the norm. This is the normal situation. The key becomes how do you get the small producer to produce more? That's the issue. That's the underlying issue. You come back to the national stocks that are not necessarily there. And the producer, to have a market. That market is either moving it out of the surplus areas and the deficit areas in any one year, or somebody guaranteeing a price for them to be able to produce those goes into bins somewhere waiting for the next planned crisis. So that's my question: is how, in the terms of the developmental side, the development agency, with us, with the private sector investment side, could actually get into the position of supporting small growers coming into the value chain.
Okay, thanks. So I would suggest to stop here for the first question. Go back to the panel. I think there's clearly a question addressed to Gary, which have been some follow-up questions that maybe some of the panelists would like to respond and jump into around the market. So Gary, please.
Sure. Well, I think Steve and Paul in particular, you had some questions about the markets, and I think well is a difficult word to quantify. So some of this is, of course, a definitional issue. What we look at are, the best way to look at a market sometimes and oftentimes is through the pricing. And when you have a structural change, then there is a challenge in how you interpret that. And so I think I showed briefly what our interpretation is. We're watching to see whether the normal operations, the average performance of that market is still average in a variety of respects, and that's how we judge that it's operating. We also know, however, that there's a substantial portion of the grain trade of West Africa that occurs outside of normal pathways. And about a year ago or 2 years ago in Niger, we actually put border monitors on several borders to try to quantify that amount. And we found that in that year, we found about 900,000 tons of grain coming into Niger. And the official imports, if you look at over the last 5 or 10 years, they're in the range of 200,000 to 300,000. So, the part of the market and how it's operating is not seen through the official indicators. That's why we're putting more border monitors out there to track the relative changes. It's very difficult to get an accurate picture of what's happening if you don't know how that food is moving across the surface. But I do, the question about what you do if there's a new normal, I think, you know, you've got two options. You increase production, you increase the efficiency of the market. And I think that's what's called for. I think that is really where our focus should be on the Sahel. And I think several of our speakers have outlined those policies.
Okay, thank you. I think there's also a question regarding the pricing, this anomal high prices, and how do we respond to that? How can we integrate that into the type of response we need to deliver? I don't know if you have any thoughts regarding that.
I think that's, again, a question of good assessment. You know, what you do need to find is those places where people are forced out of the market by those issues. It's just a slogging on the ground to go out and look. But I think the point that we're trying to say is that this is not everywhere the case. And there are a lot of people who are judged moderately food insecure, who we are including in the numbers that we're counting as requiring an intervention. Our point is also, though, that you need to be careful about how you respond to those people, because you will have impacts by either bringing in food aid into some areas or getting rid of the incentive for that market to function. And we know that through the assessment of January, that was a multi-party assessment of markets, that traders told us uniformly that they were expecting large purchases by governments and by donors. And so in October, November, and December, they were buying heavily with the expectation that they would then resell. So part of that blip we saw in November and December was an interference in the market by perceptions, not even by actions, not even by spoken words. It was by an impression that people were going to be making large institutional purchases. That's a powerful force that we have to be very aware of and deal with appropriately.
Okay, thanks, Gary. And maybe I will go to Mohamedou Issoufou regarding Niger, the moving of population, and what could be the impact.
Je crois que je l'avais dit dans mon question que en 2011, on avait la population avec l'arrivée des Maliens qui se ça va augmenter. Que la crise, ce n'est pas uniquement une région militaire, tout le pays. C'est vrai, la tête qui a été faite en novembre, décembre, n'a pas pu couvrir la zone d'Agadez, là où on peut les avions. Parce que là-bas aussi, il y a une insécurité. Il ne faut pas faire une enquête parce qu'il y a des mines qui sont passées quelque part. C'est raison pour laquelle l'enquête n'a touché que la ville d'Agadez. Donc, c'est que sur la population-là, ça va augmenter la situation de la crise. Ça va augmenter tous les conséquences dont j'ai fait cas tout à l'heure, la mendicité, la prostitution. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment les conséquences. Ce n'est pas uniquement pour le Mali, il y a aussi vers la frontière avec le Nigeria, Boko Haram. Donc, les zones frontalières avec le Niger, à savoir Kano et Sokoto, entre Boko Haram, les gens sont en train de se dépasser pour venir au Niger. Comme ça aussi, effectivement, ça va augmenter le nombre de personnes qui sont en inspiration. Et disons, c'est la région frontalière la plus vulnérable, à savoir Mali, savoir, sont frontières avec le Nigeria, un peu avec le Niger et donc, vous voyez qu'il veut dire que les mouvements de population veulent le sud et veulent le nord, ça va faire augmenter.
Donc, so in December of 2011, we did a survey. We found out that 6 million people were very vulnerable to food. We think that with the arrival of the Malians, it's not much closer to 8 or 9 million people who are in need. Within the crisis doesn't affect just one region, but actually it affects the whole country of Niger. And since we did the survey in November and December, we realized that in the Agadez area, that is where the uranium is, we had only surveyed the city of Agadez. We were totally unable to survey outside of the city or in the countryside. insecure area, there are conflicts around the region. And so only the city was serving. Also, all these people are bringing more vaccine, more prostitution, and more of the HIV/AIDS standard that I was mentioning. Everything is increased. Now, our border with Nigeria also causes a big problem because Boko Haram is chasing the population out of Nigeria into Niger. And so you have cities like Royston, Sotoko, or others that are filling up with these Nigerian refugees. And this is increasing the number of vulnerable people. Also, all along the northern part, Maradi, Tawa, Zander, Chifa, all these cities are receiving right now lots of refugees from Nigeria.
Thanks. I think just to give another data, which is conflict in northern Mali has displaced more than 220,000 people late or January 2012, so which means before the coup. So we can see the impact after the coup that it will have, and particularly also not only on the food insecure area, but also on the corridor for pastoral people and the pressure that will add in terms of access to the food and access to the water. So I think there was a question for Mamadou Goïta before going back to another round of questions.
Thank you. I think that this question is very interesting. But usually people would say, how can small-scale farmers feed the region? This is what they have been doing since years. This region has survived because small-scale farmers have been producing, and they have been improving the production, even though they didn't get access to what that people are giving, not the business in some terms. I will give you examples. You know that the GDP of the region, 35% is from agriculture. And except Cote d'Ivoire, in all the countries, more than 90% of the producers are small-scale farmers. This is just to give you that this group has been contributing a lot, not only to create jobs, but also to create conditions for people to access to food. This is one point. And secondly, I told you, we have been moving after the food crisis in 2008. The region has improved production 32%. Because for the first time since the 80s, 84 for my country, Mali, for the first time, the government had decided to subsidize the production. And in the case of Mali, it was only 10 billion CFA. You divide it to 500, you have it in US dollars. With this 10 billion CFA, we increased the rice production to 27% in 1 year. Just access to conditions to produce, working on the fertility of the soil, also in some cases. This means that there is potential. There is a big potential in this group because it's the majority of producers. This doesn't mean that there is no private sector contribution. We have to be sure first that when we talk about family farming systems, they are agricultural companies that belong to families. They are different from private ones. But they have not only to contribute to food, to feed the population, but also to create jobs and also create wealth in the region. And this is what they are doing. We have a 3 years process in Senegal and another one in Mali, just to assess where are we now with this family farming system. We just realized that 75 from this group is vulnerable. Why? Because they are even not secure in their own land. Because they never get any subsidy from the government. And they never get any credit from any of the system that exists in the country. There is no credit system. If they exist, it's a very, very short-term credit that is very expensive, and the farmers are paying the highest interest rate. In this region, the average of the interest rate for agriculture is 38%. Because we have 2.5% per month in some countries. 2.5% interest rate. And we all know there is no single country you want to develop your agriculture if you don't subsidize the system. And to allow a credit system that will give them opportunity to have what we call the integrated return rate of the interest of the activity. And it's 7% in our region. If you have a credit of 12.5%, this is the average on the market, and they will add the VAT on that. You have 18%, and this credit they will give you for 6 months. So this means that you cannot even develop your own seed fund for it. So these are things that there is potential. Small-scale farmers has a potential to increase production. This is what they have been doing. This is why we have 59 million tons of cereal in 2009-2010 compared to the 32 million tons that we had 5 years before.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mamadou, for this comprehensive response. I promise that we go back to the public. We have only 4 less minutes. So I would suggest to have 1 or 2 questions. There's 1 here, 1 there, 3. So please be short. Present yourself and be short, please. Yes.
I was very short for the partnership. My question is the following. What are the steps you have been taking, and how can the community help you strengthen the governance of your organization so that you can mobilize better your members so that you can be more solid counterpart in the discussion and decisions taken with your government and international community? And the last is in that respect, what has been so far your interaction with your colleagues, for example?
Okay.
I'm just saying this because also you are representing a number of voters. So,
that's clear. Thanks a lot. Yeah, Mr. Please.
Brian Greenberg, and on this interaction, wanted to get the panel's thoughts on the possibility for turning a crisis into a kind of opportunity. This is a region with recurring crises where the livelihood base is primarily agricultural. Wonder, and Mr. mentioned that there has been significant degradation in farming. The soil has degraded. There are problems in water reliability, marine and otherwise. It's of course important to emphasize building up production, but that comes on a resource base already degraded and additionally stressed by future production. There's an adage that the definition of insanity is repeating technical approaches in development and expecting a different outcome. Is there an opportunity for shifting the emphasis, not to downplay the importance of production, but shifting the emphasis and say that at least additionally the generation of agricultural resources needs to be taken as equally important with the production outcome. And that fundamentally refits our approach to agriculture.
Okay, thanks. If you can be shorter for the last one.
Very familiar with the parliament voice and but just my question becomes this way. If you were to raise government support platform, how far would you scale to raise government support? In your case, from the scale that will go from 1%. And when it comes to donors, do you think donors come at you very coherent and say approach your problem? In other words, you have a say in the way donors are helping you.
Okay, thanks. I think this is a comprehensive question. It will be difficult to respond in an extensive manner. I'm sure that after this discussion, we still have opportunity also to the team. I just would like a very quick one, which is also for Fiona as representative of OFDA, which is, do you think that at this stage, concerning the discussion we had today, there is a need for a humanitarian corridor to be able to respond to the crisis, particularly in Mali? So this is one of the questions I had in mind. I really would like to get your view on that. But maybe let's start with Mamadou Issoufou. In 1 minute, I don't know if it will be doable, but to try to be concise, precise, right?
Je vais répondre de manière générale à 3 questions pour que tout le monde ait d'accord. Premièrement, pour répondre à nous appartenons à la plateforme paysanne qui a au Roman.
First, we belong to the
Donc, il y a une relation entre Morven et Europa, intermédiaire de la plateforme.
So there is an interaction.
Qu'est-ce que le gouvernement a fait? Nous, on est sorti d'une élection, des élections présidentielles qui n'a pas coûté 30 milliards. Élections présidentielles, législatives et les élections communales, 30 milliards, et on est sorti de une crise.
What did the government do for us?
On n'a pas les moyens.
We have an election that cost us 30 billion, CFA prime, president, legislative, nominal, and then what happened collapsed and nothing happened. So there's all this money for nothing.
Voilà. La troisième question, qu'est-ce que nous faisons pour que le gouvernement nous entende?
What do we do so we are heard?
Nous avons au niveau du pays un consortium de la société civile.
Yes, so organization.
Nous battons au sein de ce consortium-là pour nous faire entendre.
So we fight within the CSO so that we are heard.
Comme exemple, la stratégie de développement de l'acteur gouvernement qu'on appelle le troisième ministre nigérien. Nous avons été écoutés par le conseiller en sécurité alimentaire de Ban Ki-moon, qui est venu juste dans mon bloc pour me dire quel est mon point de vue. J'ai dit voilà moi ce que je pense de ce programme. On n'a pas été impliqué là, donc nous on ne l'avons pas. Ils ont repris le travail et c'est en cela qu'ils ont commencé à nous embaucher. C'est pour vous dire que nous avons un consortium, nous avons des cadres qui sont très ensemble.
So we have a consortium in the country
Je vais aussi
for the program that
je vais
end the
Finish complete on that, please.
Niger. And so Ban Ki-moon's advisors came to see me personally in my office and they said, what do you need? Does the government listen to you? I said, no. I said, we have not been involved at all in the trade program. So nobody listened to us. So they went back to the table. They reworked entirely the program. And now we are working in a consortium with them, thanks to this group of people, after we told them to complain.
Une question importante que nous voulons poser, est-ce que les petits producteurs font pour entrer dans le système commercial? Je crois que les organisations paysannes comme nous sommes organisés pour faire la commercialisation à travers des choses comme le warrantage, même si vous le connaissez en français, vous connaissez en anglais. Donc, c'est à travers ce warrantage que nous arrivons à nous impliquer dans la commercialisation des céréales, notamment à travers les bourses céréalières qui sont organisées au niveau national et au niveau régional. Donc, je ne vais pas entrer dans les détails comment ça fonctionne, mais voilà la manière dont nous, organisations peut-être, nous allons rentrer dans le système. Bien que là, en 2010, Morven seulement a vendu 20 tonnes au conseil du Nigeria, une union du Morven qui a vendu 20 tonnes au conseil du Nigeria. Alors qu'au début, chacun partait vendre seul. Un sac par-ci, un sac par-là, ce qui permet la spéculation. Mais avec le warrantage, ça diminue la spéculation et ça régule un peu au moins les marchés locaux.
So, last question I was asked, what is our link with the market? Well, our organization is directly linked to the market. We have managed to have exchanges in which we participate. For instance, since 2010, my organization, Morven, managed to sell 20 tons to buyers, purchasers in Nigeria. Whereas until then, every farmer went on his load and sold one bag here, one bag there, which brought about speculation. But now we can go through Morven and Morven goes straight to the market.
Okay, I will go quickly to Mamadou after Fiona, and after we have some closing remarks from Blake.
No, we don't have time, so I totally agree with you that there is a need for the paradigm shift. I'm a producer too, because those who are here, they know that I have a farm. And then working on the potential that exists and then thinking about what is the end use of our agriculture. This is a question that has not been answered in most of the West African countries. Just to give you an example, only 2 countries have agricultural policy in this region. This is Mali and Senegal. All the others have strategies, development strategies of agriculture. And then even though this orientation law that exists have to move and be implemented with specific laws related to land, to research, and so on and so forth. So this means that this shift is something that is necessary today. If you don't do that, it will be a very big problem. We need to rethink the end use of agriculture and how we organize all these market issues, and also adding value to the product within the region, and to change also consumption habits of the population. We cannot rely on rice consumption where there is no potential for our region to produce. All the resources are going on that. This is also a paradigm shift that we need to have in production. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Maybe last word to Fiona.
Thank you. I think the issue of humanitarian corridors is an easy thing to sort of throw out there and a very difficult thing to enact and enforce. So where we all have been trying to respond to the hunger cycle, to the issues we've been discussing, that's a complicated enough response as we've all agreed to. On top of that, we have the population displacement, the conflict, which is only increasing as every day goes by, not just in Mali but throughout, with the weapons coming in, with the populations moving. To address the question about the refugees from earlier, the population almost all moving into the most food insecure areas of the region where we were already responding. It's making it a very difficult situation to respond to. I think we need to work on access at all levels. We need to work with our partners, work with the national governments and all interested parties to ensure that the humanitarian community can respond in whatever way is appropriate, and to get a better sense, particularly in these areas of Mali, of what the needs are. I don't think we have great visibility on that right now. We have an idea of what could be happening, what the needs probably are, but better information would be essential. And I had one more point which just left my head, but I think we need to work towards that. And I think events in Mali with the agreement that a new president will be sworn in, I'm hoping this is trending in an upwards direction, where the past few weeks every day seems to be worse and worse news. I'm hopeful that we're going in a better direction now, that we can improve our response to the conflict of interest. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fiona. I think we are close to the end of this discussion. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I will invite Blake Stazer, which is Senior Policy Advocate for K in USA, to make some closing remarks. I would like to thank all the panelists and all the public also who joined the discussion. As you saw, it was the issue is complex, the response is as complex as the issue, if not more. We do not totally always agree on how the analysis that we do have on the market and the response that we need to give on that, particularly in a region which have been affected by the lack of remittances also this year from Libya and so on, and in a region when the most vulnerable people have been affected by several crises in few years, and when they continue also to dedicate 60 to 80% of their income household to access to the food. So it's a lot of things to discuss, to continue into the future. I think the response will take time, but we are going to this direction about trying to create this pathway for resilience. And maybe this is some of the points that Blake would like to discuss on. Blake.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just take a few minutes. You know, we're wrapping up here. As was mentioned, I work for CARE. Most folks are probably familiar with our work, but we work to empower women around the globe to help families and entire communities escape poverty, as well as deliver emergency aid to help them rebuild their lives. We've been working in the Sahel region for quite some time, working both on long-term development and short-term emergency response. And, you know, one of the things that I think is key to our short-term emergency response, and we were pleased to see USAID responding this way, is responding in a flexible manner, and that's something we've been advocating for quite some time. So you see a lot of the response recently with cash-based assistance, cash transfers, food vouchers, cash for work programs that were all mentioned earlier today with the panelists. I think this flexible approach is a key component to both addressing the situation in the Sahel as well as similar situations addressing food insecurity. we've been advocating with partners like Oxfam and others for an approach like this as Congress here in the U.S. takes up reauthorization of the Farm Bill, looking at the International Food Assistance Program to be as flexible as possible. In addition to the short-term emergency response, we heard a lot about the longer-term development response needed, programs to increase resiliency for folks in the Sahel. CARE's been working on programs like that. One of our programs is the Village Savings and Loan Program to increase the resiliency of communities, critical to empower these individuals to help break the cycle of hunger, and I also argue to help break the cycle of poverty in the Sahel. I think they're of course linked. And we know that we have a partner with USAID in this as well. They're working really hard, I think, recently to link the short-term immediate humanitarian response to the longer-term development divide. Matter of fact, there was a conference just last week held in Nairobi with agricultural ministers on this specific issue. So I think working on that is a good model to follow. And finally, from our perspective at CARE, one of the things that wasn't discussed too much today, it was touched upon in terms of communities in the Sahel and around the globe that rely on agriculture, is the effects of climate change. And nowhere on the planet are people more vulnerable to the impact of climate change than sub-Saharan Africa. You look at the erratic rainfalls as the example of this. CARE launched in 2002 an adaptation learning program for Africa with our overarching goal to increase the capacity of vulnerable households to adapt to climate variability and change. So I think that's going to be another key component to the response in the long term. So kind of taking the panel and looking at what was said today, we heard from experts, including voices from farmers in the region, USAID officials, and others on this complex situation in West Africa's Sahel. And as was pointed out, this is at least in part the result of chronic hunger and malnutrition facing the millions in the region. And I think to truly break the cycle, will take a concerted effort of all of us working together to respond to both the immediate needs and the underlying causes of the cycle. And that will be critical. I think our shared vision is to move away from crisis mode and one that maintains assistance, but more importantly, one that builds resilience in the long term to dramatically reduce the millions in the region suffering from chronic hunger and malnutrition. We heard a lot of focus on different components of this, the political, the economic, the humanitarian aspects of the crisis. All of these need to be addressed to our policymakers, both here in the U.S., in Africa, and around the globe. One of the things I think we're under no illusion that this will be easy. Today's briefing draws the importance of raising the awareness of the public to this issue. I think it's human nature to want to respond to an emergency, but it's much more difficult to respond earlier in the process, to build resiliency. That's a much tougher nut to crack, and I think that's something that we work together on. There's clear evidence that it's much more cost-effective to do it this way, but it's still a tougher thing to do when it's not, on the agenda of the policymakers. So in concluding, we look to address the underlying causes of the crisis as well as the long-term sustainable development to strengthen the resiliency of the communities in the Sahel and around the globe. Emergency assistance must be flexible in this address. And I just want to thank all of our panelists today and all of you for attending this panel, and thank you very much.